Hello, friends. My name is Host Eric. I'm the host of Talking with Famous People. And today I'm going to respond to a question that was asked in the comments of a video from an individual named Fur Bowl Dance Party who works in the education field and manages a group of children, perhaps a daycare situation, after school situation, I don't know. The comment is this: I manage a bunch of kids. To help them get along, I try to get them to be self aware of how they are thinking. Things lead to who's good at what. Pecking orders want to assert themselves. When covering four types, I'm slow to put FI value into S and F types and tend to overstifle my T and N favoritisms, so I end up coming off deadpan. It's like doing a cat flip mentality. So my question: what's an example of SESI that an elementary to middle school will understand the values of instantly, but still hypothetical enough not to damage their personal expectations? Kids sense stuff naturally, so they always demand your best. My best needs help. Okay, so um, before I address this stuff directly, and before I even get into any of this stuff here, I want to go over a little bit of my credentials, I guess you'd say. So I feel very qualified to answer this question or to address this subject in general because I am a longtime school teacher. That's been my career. Since I graduated from college, I started in special education, but moved on to teaching English and eventually to coaching debate. I'm now a debate coach by trade, a private debate coach with one debate client at the moment and some English clients and stuff, and I do YouTube and whatever. But for quite a while, the I was the director of a very successful big debate school and the primary classroom teacher. I was a full-time classroom teacher as an English teacher for years, so I've got a lot of experience in education and working with kids and also with typing kids. So I used to have on my channel quite a few typing videos of students, but when YouTube got super weird about minors, I took all those videos down. Anyhow, so having read this again now, I think I understand better what they're saying. I kind of had some trouble figuring out what exactly they meant here, but I think Furbowl Dance Party is saying that they naturally favor N's and T's, and they want to balance against their favoritism by showing value to S and F types, and it's a challenge balancing that sort of thing, to try to not basically project onto their students their own cognitive function bias, which is a great concern to have. It's like having that concern means you're a decent human being. You're trying to not do what everyone's done for such a long time. Not just decent, it means you're a good human being. Like, plenty of decent human beings are just continuing the same kind of ontological violence that has always happened just because they don't know any better. They don't know anything about cognitive functions, yada, yada, yada. Let me get a refill on my coffee. I'm sorry to do this in the middle of an uploaded video. I would normally not do this, but I really want to get a cup of coffee. So, anyhow, now that oh wait, it is full. Shh, Eric. I thought it was empty. It's full. The circumstantial considerations are this: you're dealing with children who are there involuntarily, fundamentally, and are compelled to work as a group that is non-voluntary and non-natural. There are certain types who would avoid contact with each other probably if they were afforded each their autonomous, natural decision-making capacities, but they're unable to do that in school. It is also true that they are being bombarded with normative messages all the time about what's good and what's wrong and what's right and what's valued and what's countervalued. So caring about that is important, and I appreciate you bringing up the subject. So there is this fact about school as well, that while it may be wrong to compel everybody to be there, that it may be wrong the way it plays out in the status quo. There may be a lot of things about it that are bad or able to be condemned. It is necessarily the case that for the people who were there all day, so for example, with these 40 kids and this teacher, and they're together and they're compelled to make it through the day, that there's a shared responsibility of the shared reality, which is, okay, I agree, the compulsion's wrong, we shouldn't all be forced to be here, you guys should be able to come and go as you please. If you don't like it here, you should be able to just not stay home if you want, or whatever we might all agree on. Unfortunately, we are all subject to the same degree of compulsion here, more or less. Now, you children might complain that I, as a matter of fact, as an adult, am not subject to that compulsion because I can always quit my job, whereas you guys can't quit this. And that would be a fair complaint. But let's pretend for a second that I'm on the same page as you, that I absolutely need this job no matter what, and I can't quit really functionally, and that fundamentally I'm as trapped here as you. Then we all share the responsibility to take on the duty to make it less torturesome for everybody, to not exploit the opportunity to make the people miserable while we've got them trapped here. That applies to me and to you equally well. So, I mean, I'd begin with that kind of discussion, and then I'd say, now look, as a teacher, I've got two considerations I got to worry about: modality of impact and access channel. So some of you guys are impactable by some kinds of approaches, and other kinds of approaches will just fall on deaf ears. And so I need to be attentive of both my own habits of preferring certain kinds of instructive approaches and of valuing certain kind of academic skills, and imposing upon my students the idea that some of them are fundamentally superior to others because they better manifest skills that I value, which, whether it's said explicitly or not, is a message that's sent to kids all the time implicitly. And the one message that kids almost never hear, and nobody almost ever hears, is there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. You don't need to be different than you are. Nobody ever hears that. Certainly childhood doesn't imprint that upon us, does it? So, when to introduce kids to personality type? First, let me catalog some of the negative responses. A lot of people will react by saying, you shouldn't be introducing kids to personality type theory very young. It's a bad idea. And here's some of the reasons why they'll make these claims. Unwise. It leads to limit internalization. Once you tell somebody, well, you're TI polar, you'll never get good at conditional logic, and they just internalize that into self-fulfilling prophecy. My response to this is that it's complete nonsense. That it's complete BS. That I could no more, if you take a TI Dom and I told them they were ESFP and TI polar and would never be good at logic, I would not change a single bit of thing about them. They would still be, they wouldn't buy it. They'd critique it logically. And if I tell an ESFP that, let's say they're likely to be like, well, let's pretend they say, F you, I'm going to try my hardest. I'll be proved right. They won't ever really be good at it. It won't be something that's comfortable for them. It won't be an area of academics where they think they're at home. And that's simply the truth. It won't change. Personality is across the entire lifetime, so we don't have to worry about that. People don't internalize things that aren't true about themselves, that are about attentional channels. They may internalize things that aren't true about themselves regarding statuses. That happens all the time, but you're never going to get a TI Dom to believe they're TI polar. You're never going to get a TE Dom to meaningfully try to live life as a TE polar person because they believe your words. Words only have a limited capacity to change people's ontology or to be internalized, and certain kinds of things can be internalized a lot more easily than others. If I make comments about your appearance, that can be internalized very easily because it's status. If I tell you, you fundamentally go through life by trying to solve problems, by not including other people in your problem solving, if you try to live like that for a little while and you're actually TE polar and you're paying any attention at all by TI, you'll realize it's completely wrong. Every time I have a problem to solve, I seem to turn to somebody else. So it's difficult to get people to internalize shit that's sort of fundamentally runs afoul of their actual experiences, unless maybe they're SI polar, but if they are, then they're NI tools, they're not going to buy your bullshit anyway. Okay, some people say it's unwise because it leads to expectational burdens. Well, you're an NTP, you should be good at this. That's a fair critique, except you're setting expectational burdens they're actually going to meet. In other words, if you're right and you tell somebody they're an ENTP and they should be good at debate, they will discover, in fact, that they are much better at debate than the average classmate, and that it is something that is within that's in their wheelhouse. Part of the problem that I had as a kid is I had a lot of trouble believing I genuinely was better at something. It seemed I must be giving into my own bias here. I shouldn't trust myself about this. If I think I'm good at something, or somebody tells me I'm good at something, yeah, but I don't really believe it. There's no reason to believe it. It seems illogical that I'd be an outlier in anything given the total amount of people in the world and such. So that's something of a concern, but it's also something liberating to tell people it's okay for you to be exceptional. It's okay for you to understand within you that you're an outlier on certain areas, and that while it seems statistically unlikely, it is in fact the case, and that we have good reason to explain why this particular area is your strength and why this particular area is more unusually found as a big strength, given the lack of general usefulness of intuitives and therefore corresponding rareness. People say it's pointless. They're too young. You can't tell what type they are. That's not true. You can start telling type very, very young. I've typed people in general third grade and no difficulties, and it's quite remarkable to see a young TI Dom just intuitively, naturally, like a fish to water, just take to the TI questions, and the exact opposite with a ESFP or ENFP. Pointless. They're too young to understand. If you do type them correctly and tell them they can't understand that, that might be somewhat true. It's like there's a certain amount of metacognition that isn't enabled until a certain amount of pre-work is done cognitively. I've noticed before as a teacher that, like, I made a rule at a certain point. I won't take any fourth graders into competition flow debate, which then I occasionally make an exception to if there's a particularly advanced fourth grader. But there seems to be something that happens in kids' brains between fourth and fifth grade that clicks, and then all of a sudden they're able to do the abstract shit that's required in competition flow debate at the level that's required. The only ones who really maybe I'd make the exception for when they're fourth graders are typically INTPs, INTJs, ENTPs. They might be ready in fourth grade, but there's a level of abstract reasoning that something in kids' brains has to click before it happens, regardless of type. And I'm not exactly sure how to explain it more detailed than that. It's just I've seen it too many times, the way that this kid, that switch hasn't switched yet. They're too little, and then sure enough, 4 months later, all of a sudden their reasoning's clicked on, and it's like a light. Like it was always there. You could see it was there, but if you try to get it to do anything, you get this kid sort of collapsed into confusion about the frame. And if you just give them a little bit of time, that switch clicks, and then all of a sudden they're capable of doing relatively fully realized abstract reasoning. Risky, too young to be trusted with the knowledge. This has got to be like an NTJ perspective, I think. Some people will say, well, if you tell them all about this, then they'll exploit that knowledge to take advantage of the other children. Really? That one doesn't seem to hold a lot of water to me. Or risky mistyping can lead to ontological discomfort. I think this is a legitimate concern. If somebody's not good at typing people and get the kid to type wrong and keeps telling them they're this, I've seen plenty of people who've experienced ontological discomfort because they've been mistyped and they want the incorrect answer. ISFPs, for example, often come to me after they've been mistyped by somebody else. INFJs, same thing. They're not satisfied until the truth is resonant with their attentional focus and priority. My experience, type plenty of kids as young as third grade. The results uphold the idea of personality unchanging. In other words, TI polars, TI polar in third grade, TI doms, TI dom in third grade. It's not the result of specific learnings or whatever. one of the genuine risks and harms of getting too much into typology with little kids is if you do it in a group and they see what type they each are, and then they hear these type descriptions, and then they do the same thing everybody else does with type descriptions, which is like, oh, this one sounds cool and this one sounds dumb. So you got to set that up ahead of time by making sure you set up the frame and proper approach to begin with, which is to say, like, okay, so this comment here, it sounds like this teacher is saying, I want to use my cognitive function knowledge to prevent my ontological assault of others by the reflexive projection of my own values onto everybody that often happens. I want to prevent that from occurring, and I want to better be able to reach those students who are not that I'm not naturally going to value and understand because they attend in ways that are less native to my ways of attention. So the question here, what's an example of SESI that an elementary to middle school student will understand the value of instantly? Well, I'm not sure. I'm still not really sure what you mean here. It's like, are you trying to explain to them the cognitive functions and how they differ? Or are you trying to get people to value manners of attention and values that aren't implicit to themselves? So in other words, how are you going to convey to the N's and the T's that the S's and F's are valuable too? If that's what you're asking, then, well, the N's and the T's are much more likely to be responsive to this kind of explanation, to say that it's important to remember that every cognitive configuration is an approach towards making the map and territory match in some way, so that you don't have bad surprises. That all of life is about avoiding bad surprises. That's the prime directive. You avoid bad surprises when your map is accurate. When you can successfully predict that when you go to school today, you're going to be safe, you're not going to be bullied, you're not going to be teased, you're not going to be subject to physical violence, you're not going to be compelled to persist in activities you find uncomfortable, etc., then that is one possible world. That's not the world of school, though, is it? So school is inherently traumatizing because it reveals to kids right from the get-go that there's a lot of things in life that they can't map because they can't control. In other words, they don't get to choose whether or not they want to sit next to Bobby, even though Bobby makes their life miserable. When they complain about it, they may or may not land on deaf ears, may or may not be turned against them. There's no authentic way for them to escape. The authentic way for them to escape is to separate themselves from the circumstance, but that's not acceptable in school. You can't just get up and say, okay, I'm done with this bullshit. I'm going home. Fuck this noise. It's like, can you imagine like a fourth grader doing that? It'd be hilarious. Okay, you know what? I've been sitting here in this class now for like 2 weeks since the beginning of fourth grade. And I gotta tell you, and I've been generous in my assessment, but Mrs. Johnson, this whole farce that you call a learning environment is an absolute fucking joke. I am not going to waste one more second of my time here. Plus, by the way, Johnny back there, I think he's a burgeoning sociopath. Somebody should do something about that shit. I don't know if you've been noticing he's abusing Janice in ways that'll probably traumatize her for years. You're doing nothing about it. I hope this contemptuous dismissal on my way out the door rings in your head for quite a while, because you've got a lot to learn, lady. And then the fourth grader walks out. That would just be history's greatest moment, you know? That would be history's greatest moment. I forget I'm not live streaming. There's nobody here to respond to me. So anyway, how do you convey this stuff to the kids? Well, for the intuitives and the thinkers, they'll probably want a good abstract explanation that suggests the reason that you value this and this and this is because it's consistent with your function stack, and you're sort of projecting your own, what's important to you, onto everybody. But everybody's doing that. So when there are conflicts, it's likely because people have conflicting values. So an extroverted sensing value might say it's important that we get shit done regardless of if it's perfect or not. Whereas a countervalued extroverted sensing approach would say, no, I want to make sure everybody has a chance to talk. It's fully deliberated out. We're sure that we've thought about all the possibilities before we take action that we can't undo easily. Those are two competing frames. They both have their virtues and their harms. It is true sometimes that you need to stop trying to be perfect and just do stuff. And it's also true sometimes that you need to be careful and cautious and really deliberative before you take action. It really depends on the circumstances. So being able to recognize that one's own implicit value is best served when one successfully incorporates the virtues of competing values and balances against the bias towards one's implicit value more successfully. That's a good thing. I don't know if I completed that sentence correctly, but you get where I'm going with it. The end. Thanks a lot for your comment. Good job working with people, young people, and trying to factor in the reality that sort of the whole educational system is predicated on a false understanding of what human beings are. So good job trying to make things better. I commend you, and have a great evening or morning or whatever time of day it is when you watch this. Once again, I've been host Eric, and thank you for watching Talking with Famous People. Liking and subscribing is always fantastic. Gets you a lot of karma points.